Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk with Boice. I am Boice. This is my podcast you are checking out. If this is your first time checking it out, Talk Music Talk is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people connected to music from different genres and different backgrounds, both established and emerging, singers, singer-songwriters, music journalists, and music therapists. And on this new episode, I had the pleasure of speaking to Gaya Feldheim Schorr. She is a singer, multi-instrumentalist, originally from Tel Aviv, currently based in Brooklyn. She has a new project out. It is called I Have Considered the Lillies. Gaya Sings Connie. I was introduced to Gaya from Tel Aviv, from Kadawa, an incredible Tel Aviv, Brooklyn-based jazz band who I interviewed several years ago. You should check out their music, Kadawa. Her new project, Gaya Sings Connie, I Have Considered the Lillies, it puts Gaya in the context of performing the music of singer-songwriter Connie Converse. If you are not familiar with her, I was not familiar with the music. This is an incredible story of a woman who is unique and missing. No one knows anything about her anymore. Gaya talks about what she does know, how she came to her music, how she discovered her music, what Connie's music means to her. In addition to talking about this Connie project, Gaya also discusses life in Tel Aviv, what it was like moving to New York, the culture shock a few years ago. We also talk about depression, the value of being vulnerable, how important it is to share our personal stories. We also talk about her recent weight loss and what that has meant to her. Usually, I like to include a song or two from the artist I am interviewing, but due to licensing issues, which Gaya talks about in the interview, I will not be able to do so, but I will put links in the show notes so you can check out Gaya performing, an incredible artist. This is a wonderful conversation with somebody who is an original, transforming the music of another original artist. Here it is, without further ado, my conversation with Gaya Feldheim Schorr. And we kick off the conversation talking about the TV series Sharp Objects. Enjoy.
There are not a lot of shows that, talk about those type of feminine characters.
Okay.
So I'm a strong, I support showing some different feminine characteristics that are not necessarily been showing so much in media.
Oh, okay. What would be some example of that?
Like more violence and complex. Like on the one hand, it's like the character is like really dark and violent, especially towards herself, and with this question mark if it's towards other people, and the way it's judged. And the way it doesn't fit into like what a woman should be. Okay. But on the other hand, you understand her so much. It's like this round character of like everybody is, like you understand where it's coming from, and you really, get emotionally attached to the character. Okay. Is it that we're uncomfortable or don't expect women to be violent in the way that we're comfortable with men's violence? Exactly. Okay. Or with sexuality, like all of those issues that, cool. They're not it's very recent that there are a representation of anything that is not like socially acceptable generally, whether it's like about women or people of color or different ethnicities or, that it's not fitting into the characteristics of what it's supposed to be. Have you always been aware of that, or when did you become aware of that? That's a good question. I think I was always aware of it to some extent, especially because of my mom. She's a pretty magnificent human, but she was also she was raised by a couple that she's adopted, and she was raised by a couple that survived the Holocaust and moved to Israel, and on the other hand, she was adopted into a religious kibbutz, which is a very specific concept.
Okay.
Because on the one hand, it's like this commune that is, to some extent, like very like communist, socialist, but on the other hand, it has the religious aspect of it. So it's like this really gossipy, small town kind of vibe of, but of religious people.
Yeah.
And she wasn't like, I think at the age of 3 or 4, she already realized that
wasn't for her.
wasn't fit into that. And especially with religious families, it's like a lot of times very hard to accept that your kid would take a different path.
Yeah.
And they were so like amazingly loving that no matter like what kind of trouble she did or caused, or what kind of statements she put out with like at really young ages, they accepted like everything, and still gave her love.
Yeah.
And I think that combination kind of, like she's a very, very compassionate person and was raised on those morals of like, doesn't really matter. Like, even though, especially Judaism has a lot of, very, like you can go into, and I think with every religion, you can go into the extreme that is more exclusive than inclusive.
Yeah, yeah.
But she was taught, whether by just, by example or their morals of like just treating people as people.
Yeah.
And she's a social activist in Israel for the refugees from Sudan and Eritrea in Israel, that they're being treated in the most horrible way.
Yeah.
So I think that sort of kind of set in.
Okay. Yeah.
And with the conversations in the last, couple of years, I'm beginning to be more and more and more aware of different things.
So you were brought up in that, as seeing her as an example.
Yeah. I think generally, like that, at least I strive to, just see the person in front of me and not necessarily any boxes that I can check. And I hope to be treated the same, but it doesn't really happen on both ends. Like, it's just very hard.
Because I'm reading the novel A Place for Us. I forget the author's name. But as I'm reading it, because it's about 3 kids and the one sister's getting married and the one brother, it's sort of like your mother, where he just doesn't, necessarily follow the whole beliefs, this Indian family. And I was like, what must that be like when you don't, everything around you says you should supposed to go this path and you don't feel that way? And like, how do you just go along? Do you not? Do you fight it?
Yeah. It's a huge conflict. And I think everybody feels it to some extent in different aspects in their lives. Yeah. Of like not fitting into the pattern or the society that they're in or its norms. And generally I feel like it's very, very recent that we're making an effort to think about those things. And
because it's interesting, we give a lot of lip service to individuality and being unique.
Exactly.
But then, like, on a day-to-day basis, when we come across people like that, we're, like, very judgmental.
Yes, exactly.
Like, why are you standing out like that? Stop that.
It's because also we want to justify our own decisions about our own lives, And it's very hard to coexist with something that is very different than you. But that's exactly, the point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think maybe there's a little envy in that. Look at this person being different and individual, and I may not have the courage.
Yeah. It's like it's something that is just, it pushes your buttons when you encounter someone that like triggers you, whether to, envy sort of place or a disgust sort of place, or something happens there because it's so, it like clashes with whatever you know about yourself or others, or think that people should act, and it's a whole thing.
Well, you're from Tel Aviv, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Were you raised there? Or?
Yeah, I was raised in the center of Tel Aviv.
Okay, so did you? I mean, having a mother like that, did you have to deal less to bristle with, or
less what?
Had less to bristle or fight against since you had a mother? Who was like kind of open-minded?
Yes and no. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Or new things to bristle against.
I'm not sure what bristle is, actually.
Oh, okay. No, to push against to things you don't fit for you.
Yeah. I think it's like a 50-50 sort of thing because on the one hand, I was raised, like, both of my parents are artists, and I was raised in, like, the center of Tel Aviv, which is very liberal and, you know, a bubble inside of Israel that is very different than other places. But I was pretty much an outsider growing up for the kids in my class. Yeah. Because I was really into music and I was pretty heavyweight, like until I moved here, basically.
Oh, okay.
I lost around 60 pounds since I moved to New York. So I was kind of the outsider going to the conservatory after school instead of like hanging with people. And to some extent, I was a misfit, or at least felt that way, whether it was reality or not. I don't know. It was in Israel. There are a lot of different things you can push against, and I think especially in comparison to a lot of people I know, or generally especially nowadays, like the current ideas. Whether it's about, you know, any political or social aspect, I might be a little more extreme than others, just because I'm very not attached to a lot of those, you know, aspects that people get very defensive about when it's about their home. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't know so much.
So what did the music start for you? Like what first instrument or voice?
So it started from voice and piano.
Okay.
My mom actually has like the most eclectic musical taste, and there was music playing all the time in our house from all different genres. And I think the story that they say, like I obviously don't remember those kind of stuff, but my mom says that my aunt heard me singing in the shower when I was like 5 or 6, and said that I should be in a choir or something like that. So I went to like a summer camp of the Israeli opera, and I was like blown away. I think at about 6 years old. And I joined the classical choir right after that for kids, and started classical piano lessons. So I was like a complete conservatory girl, like going from 6 years old until the academic program that I was in part with the new school in the same conservatory.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
Did you know that people could do the music you were hearing, that was something that could be done?
I had a lot of different stages of different genres that I was into. Okay. So like 8 to 12, I was super classic rock, like heavy on Pink Floyd and Zeppelin, and like and Genesis and all those sorts.
Genesis.
I love
Genesis. One of my favorites.
I was basically just like going through my mom's CDs and like, you know, finding covers that look interesting and playing around with that. And I would go every day after school to like a small CD store in my neighborhood. And I had a deal there that I could just borrow CDs and return them. Kind of like a library. And then I got more into jazz when I was in middle school and high school. I went to an art high school, Thelma Yellin, which is a very like high-end artsy high school that is national. So it's they had both classical department and a jazz department. And I wasn't sure what I wanted because I was doing both. And I decided to go to jazz from there. But I was just very curious. Like I wanted to learn like as much instruments as I could. And I would like switch. I would always play classical piano and sing in that choir and sing in other groups. But I learned like saxophone for a year or two and guitar for a year, and classical double bass for 2 years. Yeah. Like I was just a little bit all over the place, but also very drive to understand as much as I can about the way music works.
Okay. What made you choose jazz?
I think it was just that freedom that...
the improvisation?
The improvisation, but also I just, my mom had CDs of... I really give a lot of credit to her because she kind of exposed me to so many different genres. But she had like Coltrane ballads in the house and like Miles Davis records, or Ella sings the Cole Porter songbook. Like these are things that
great taste.
I know. she's really great. So I knew a lot of music already, or a lot of the standards from just listening to it growing up. And there was like an ensemble in the music department I was in middle school. There was like a jazz ensemble. Yeah. So that was my first encounter with like being in a jazz ensemble. Yeah. And I kind of fell in love with it, and especially with improvisation and scat singing. Throughout high school, I would just like, transcribe with solos and just be all in the craze of loving jazz very, very passionately.
And were you thinking already, in high school, like, okay, I'm going to be a professional, or what that might look like?
Yeah, even from elementary school, I was like, this is my thing.
Yeah.
I obviously had a few patches of, very low self-esteem and like trying to figure out if this is really the thing that I'm going to do. But it was always, most of the time, it wasn't even questionable. It was just, that's all I wanted to do with my free time. And I was very lucky to be in different frames that allowed that and really pushed me to be, just like continuously excited about it. Yeah. Like I had really great opportunities from a really young age to perform like different kinds of music.
Okay. Yeah. Where'd you go to school?
Elementary school, I went to a really like regular school.
Okay. But for college?
For college, I went to new school. So I went to a program in Tel Aviv with the Israeli Conservatory. Okay. That is 2 years in Tel Aviv and 2 years at the new school in New York.
So if you get accepted in Tel Aviv, that makes it sort of
but the thing easy. Is, then you can get scholarships to go here. Okay, and obviously, the education in Israel is a lot cheaper. So then you also kind of save up instead of going to 4 years in college here. So I did 3 years in Tel Aviv because I did it during my army service.
Okay. Yes, I was going to ask you about that. The mandatory...
The mandatory army service.
Where was yours at?
I was lucky to be in something called Outstanding Musician in the Army. They have like 3 different music jobs that you can do. And one of them is that is basically only for jazz and classical musicians, of recognizing that you're a professional and allowing you, but quote unquote, allowing you to continue your career during the army. And I was in the Air Force band singing Mizrachit music, which is like Israeli Arabic pop. Okay. Kind of like the equivalent to hip hop and like the culture of it, but only, very Mediterranean and Middle Eastern, and doing choreography and holding a fake microphone made of plastic, lip syncing in front of officers most of the time.
Do you learn anything from that experience in the military that's different that you learned from music, say, being in school?
Definitely. I think, first of all, it was just the ridiculous amount of shows that we did. So it just prepares you for any like bad gig you're ever going to have. I did around 500 shows during my service in all around the country in all different, whether it's like outside without any equipment or amplifiers, or whether it's like a huge hall. And that prepares you for like a lot of things, especially, which is funny, but I was the only vocalist that was in the outstanding musician thing. So all of the other vocalists in army bands, that was like their music. That was the stuff that they wanted to sing. And for me, it was just such a huge change, especially during school, that I was like, singing super modern jazz kind of stuff, or standards and improvisation, and working on these concepts in school, and then needing to sing super pop, like kind of fake smiling to the other person next to me. Like this whole, I learned how to kind of fake those kind of things, even though it's something that I felt very uncomfortable with. I learned how to kind of pull it off, and be a little more theatrical, and a lot of things that I was really not, that weren't a part of who I was musically, and also dealing with like power dynamics and officers, and knowing when to let go, knowing when to push back, and trying to like make it as tolerable as possible. Yeah.
Because I think like a professional musician, like how many times does someone perform and they may not feel like it, but people paid their money and they're expecting you to give the best show. Like they don't care what your personal...
Or especially if you have a gig that you need to perform music that you don't usually play, or you don't like playing or singing, then it's really important to learn how to like tune yourself out from it and just be professional. So that was a pretty big lesson for me. And I was surprised that I could even sing this music, because it's so different. I'm a pretty introspective person. Like I close my eyes a lot when I sing, and I try to really listen. I'm in this little bubble in a way.
And it just pulls you out of all.
It's just like all of a sudden being a super, pop singer.
How long was the service?
2 years.
2 years. And did you go to new school right after that?
Yeah, I moved a few months after I finished my service.
Okay. Yeah. So once you said it was living in Tel Aviv, it was like a bubble. Was this your first exposure outside the bubble when you were traveling in the military?
Not really. Okay. I mean, I have family all around Israel.
Okay.
And generally Israel is just tiny.
Yeah.
I mean it as a bubble and other people see it as a bubble, just like New York is a bubble in relation to the States.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or New York or San Francisco, LA. Like, it's just like a different sort of environment and population usually than in other places. I love Tel Aviv. It's like a beautiful city.
Yeah.
With all its imperfections. But I traveled pretty often, and I was lucky to travel with music as well from a pretty young age. Yeah. But definitely as far as, learning how to just be with people that I wouldn't like usually be in touch with.
Yeah.
And like making relationships with people that I wouldn't necessarily choose to have a relationship with in like external life.
Yeah.
Meaning having, someone in my boot camp, for example, you're sleeping in a tent with 20 girls.
Yeah.
And one of them, one girl was on the phone talking to her boyfriend or something late at night. The other girl is putting up a knife to her. Like, really extreme, like, different people than the ones I've encountered growing up. This is like a very extreme example, but just like to have a spectrum of people that you're interacting with is very interesting. It's like the army, as I see it, is a very anthropological experience, most of all.
Well, this seems like that would prepare you for New York.
Yes. In a sense, yeah.
So was there any culture shock coming to New York?
Obviously, yeah. It's a culture shock to just move to a different country. It doesn't really matter where. I was here twice before I moved here. But it was living here is just a whole different experience. And it took some time until I've felt comfortable.
What was your focus in music when you studied? What was your major in school at the new school?
Just performance.
Okay.
Yeah, voice performance.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how was the experience at the new school for you?
The new school was very interesting. On the one hand, it was incredible to, be in that hectic environment with so many teachers that I admired for many years, and being so close to venues that I only heard about. On the other, it was surprisingly a lot less focused on the creative process as I would have imagined it. But I think it's kind of problematic with art pedagogy in general.
Were they teaching like the business or more theory?
I think just the school itself is a business, which is a concept that I'm not familiar with until I moved to the States. And I was surprised that there wasn't much criticism generally, or constructive or not, in the school, because Israeli education and its people in general are very direct and very eye level. And there isn't so much that academic, dynamic of like teacher-student with having that distance. It's very, especially with jazz. The jazz teachers in Israel, it's like a whole, one community. And it doesn't matter if you're 18 or 80. Everybody kind of speaks like so friends in a way.
So you know exactly where someone stands or feels about your music.
It was just very, I think, trying to homogenize levels of creative processes is something that I think is problematic to begin with. But I was surprised that it didn't have that oomph of really making you sweat to get better. It was on the side of how much work I had to do for my degree. But I really, really enjoyed also just being in a university, being able to take other classes that are not about music, because that was a first for me. So I studied German for 2 years, and I took a class about creative writing in museums. And I had a lot of opportunities to just fuel other things that I love doing, which was really, really cool. And especially a few teachers that really taught me a lot of things that I'm really grateful for.
How long ago was this?
I graduated in 2016. Yeah.
And you said, so at what point did you lost the 60 pounds? When was that? Was that school?
It just happened throughout the first 2-3 years I was here. I didn't do anything in order for it to happen. And funny enough, it happened to my best friend too. We were in it together in a way. We both lost half of ourselves, basically.
Would you just change diet?
I think it's just the different energy and stress and subway stairs and walking so much and having not a lot of money to buy food and just moving into a different country. It's a lot. So I think that was my body's way to react to it, which I have no problem with. In the beginning, it still is kind of weird, because if people haven't seen me since, they're like, "Are you okay? Are you eating?" And I'm like, "I'm doing so much better." I'm like, I don't have all of this extra thing on me, and I feel lighter and healthier. On the other hand, it's very interesting to see how people react to you differently, because all of a sudden, it's a whole different sensation just walking down the street or talking to people, or as far as work as well. Which is very, very interesting, because inside I still feel the same way that I did. And the way I'm perceived is completely different now.
Even though you're the same.
Yeah.
How's it been dealing with that?
It's been there are ups and downs. On the one hand, because I felt like I kind of lost my strength in a sense, because, my physical strength too was very based on the fat that I had. Yeah. And then once it was gone, and with all of those reactions of all of a sudden, you're so tiny. Oh, you're so small. Because I am short, but I never thought that my bone structure is as petite as I realized it is.
Okay, you didn't know that until...
I was sure that like my bones were here, like a few inches past where they are. Yeah. So all of that kind of vocabulary kind of made me feel very, very weak in a sense. So I started practicing yoga and doing more things for my body, which I wasn't really able to do in the years before that. Not since I was like, 12 or 13, being really into sports. And I just finished actually a yoga teacher's training, and I'm certified to teach yoga now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Which is really cool. That's a lot of work.
Yeah. Wait, how many do 200 hours?
200 hours.
Good for you.
Thank you. Which I'm really excited about. Yeah. So it kind of brought me to a place where I regained a lot of strength from getting to, know my body in this new sensations. And it still feels weird a lot of times, especially like watching photos of me from a few years ago or seeing people react to like the way I look now. It has also some, very huge cons, which is, a lot more sexual harassment and a lot more male attention that I wasn't, used to before or didn't recognize as much, which are things that generally I think most women, if not all, are dealing with, especially nowadays. But it's just with that combination of what's going on in the past few years and the change in my body, like it's kind of the extreme of like having this in the front of my consciousness. So it's quite interesting. Yeah.
So, and this may be a dumb question. Does it affect how, like, having the weight and losing weight, how you sing in any way? Or you have to learn how to sing differently?
Definitely.
Okay, good. It wasn't a dumb question.
No, not at all. Obviously, it really affects the body. And in the first year, I was like, and sorry for cursing, but what the fuck is going with my voice? Like, I'm not singing the way I was.
Yeah.
My sound is different. My support, like my vocal support is different. What do I do? And it took me some time to figure that out again. And luckily I had some really great teachers, but it was a whole change, both emotionally and physically, with singing and in general. And it's been quite interesting to also see it from the side a little bit, from an objective point of view of just like recognizing those different phases and changes. And I'm still getting used to it, and my body still continues to change because I'm practicing, physical things, whether it's singing or yoga or other things. I still, especially with this training, all of a sudden, like so many new muscles are coming out, and my body is still adapting to this whole transformation. So it definitely affects my singing.
So that's when did you talk about the new project, the Connie Converse? Yeah. When did you discover her, hear about her?
So funny enough,
and say a little bit about like the background.
So the project is called I Have Considered the Lillies, Gaya Sings Connie, and it's about Connie Converse, who was she's considered to be the first singer-songwriter ever, meaning Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, all of those cats were in high school when she was writing this music, and she lived in New York, in the Village, in the 50s for about 11 or 12 years. And she disappeared in 1974 and never wasn't found. Nobody knows what happened to her. They never found her car. She left letters to her family and friends. saying, "Let me go."
Yeah.
And nobody knows what happened to her. And this project is, in a way, not in a way, it's just really, really deeply rooted in my heart.
Yeah.
Because I think the thing that caught me about that story is the disappearing. Because whenever I am in the lowest of lows, my crave is to disappear.
Yeah.
It's not to, do any drastic action like leaving or killing myself or any of that. It's like doing this magical thing of disappearing. And I was very, very depressed last year for a few months and wasn't sure if I should stay in New York and had so many different questions.
Yeah.
And such a vast, I don't know, like a very, very hard time to feel that I have merit and that I'm to have security in myself and in my music. And then I encountered her story through, funnily enough, for a Facebook post of the bass players playing with me in the band. She posted, she's a Facebook persona, very, very funny one. I think I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly, but she's calling her Shredrerella Regrowowitz or something around that end. Her name is Eva Lawitz. And she posted, she has so many musician friends. She posted, tell me all of the best music that I don't know. Just post it in the comments. I want to get to know some beautiful music. And I followed that post adequately.
Yeah.
And then saw an image of a YouTube video that was, I felt like I've seen it before, but I wasn't sure. And it was Connie's song of Two Tall Mountains.
Okay.
And the moment I heard it, I was like, wow,
Yeah.
I haven't heard anything like that in a really long time. And I started doing some research and found out about her story, and it really caught me because she wrote the most beautiful music that, speaking of our conversation before, didn't fit. And she didn't fit into society at the time, especially in the 50s, which women were supposed to be this and that and that and that, and she wasn't any of that. And she was, for lack of better words, ahead of her time, whether by the fact that she was a feminist, an academic, and a composer, and she taught herself how to play guitar and just composed all of those magnificent songs by herself with a tape recorder.
Yeah.
And whenever she tried sharing it with, the larger world, she just got a no thanks, and nobody got it, and she became very depressed and moved to Ann Arbor for where her brother lived for a few years until she decided to disappear.
Yeah.
And she wrote hundreds of songs that are really so unique, especially to the time, whether harmonically, melodically, or the lyrics especially are just things that people didn't play at the time.
Yeah. Were there themes she was talking about, certain themes she was talking about? Or?
Well, most of her songs, and this is a very interesting thing, is that most of her songs are very cynically and in a very interesting, unique way are longing for a lover. But on the other hand, no one of her friends or family knew of any relationship she's ever had, nor her sexual orientation. Yeah. But a lot of her songs are this imagery, imaginatory worlds. A lot of talk about spiritual bypass. She grew up in a Baptist family, and her father was a minister. And she got accepted to Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts, and won 10 academic awards when she was in high school. Yeah. So she was a very like promising, religious, kind of good girl, prodigy growing up. And she left the college after 2 years and moved to New York to pursue like her dreams of making music. And she talks a lot about that. She talks about what it's like being a woman that doesn't fit. So she's saying in her song Roving Woman, people say a roving woman is likely not to be better than she ought to be. So when I stray away from where I've got to be, someone always takes me home. A lady never should habituate saloons, but that is where I find myself on any afternoon. And just as I begin to blow away the foam, someone tips his hat to me and takes me home. Now, poker is a game a lady shouldn't play, but every floating poker game just seemed to float my way. But long before I've lost a thing besides my comb, someone tips his hat to me and takes me home. And she has just really, her music is so special, and something about her story and her struggles, whether with mental illness, whether with being an outsider and being a woman in that time, not fitting into the norms where she should, and not being successful with her music, even though it has so much merit by its own, she still felt that she doesn't have a place in the world. And that's exactly the way I felt while I was learning her music. And slowly I started, relearning guitar, because I played guitar a little bit when I was a kid, but haven't really touched it since. And I started transcribing all of her music and taught myself guitar through listening to her songs. Okay. And started working on this project. And in a sense, it was kind of the thing that took me out of that place. Because I think it's something everybody feels, but nobody likes to talk about, especially in America. As an outsider, I feel like I can say it, that it's like a very...
I agree.
Yeah. I feel like it's something that people are very uncomfortable with sharing.
And yet so many people deal with it.
I know. Yeah. And this is exactly the thing of if stories generally, whether they are individual, whether it's art, it doesn't really matter. If stories are the thing that we perceive as most preciously human, we let so many of them get lost, in translation, whether someone else takes it as its own, whether it just goes and flies by without anybody noticing. And there are so many who disappeared or were twisted, and I think it's very unfortunate. And I think, we're just letting so much beauty, kind of sneak away. And from ourselves, too, from the way we treat ourselves mostly. So this project, in a sense, is my path with trying to figure out what kind of things I can do or I'd like to have in this world, with the way I treat myself and the way I treat other people and the way I'm being treated, of tapping into that human experience and of reaching out to each other and, talking about it and being there for yourself first, but for other people too. I think every artist encounters a point where they don't have any sense of self-worth, and nobody likes to share that. And when you feel like it's not just you, I think with anything, when you know it's not just you and you know that this is not necessarily who you are, your thoughts are not who you are, and you find other people that are dealing with the same kind of issues, it makes it okay. Yeah. And it's so important to feel okay, because life is hard enough, just enough, So, especially if you're doing it to yourself, especially if other people are doing it to you, I think compassion generally is just so important and is only talked about in a very large scale, And there are so many little things that we can do both for ourselves and others that can, facilitate like just a nicer experience of it all.
Because I may hear your story in my time of need and gain strength from your perceived weakness.
Yeah.
Like you may think it's weak, and it's like, no, it's actually, you're going through that too. Oh, so am I. Exactly. I feel better.
Exactly. And I think Connie's story is such an amazing representation of that, both because nobody knew about her music until like 10, 15 years ago.
Oh, okay. So this was all discovered after.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there was one guy, Gene Deitch, who was a cartoonist. And he was, a persona in the village in those days. And he used to host saloons.
Yeah.
And one of his friends brought Connie. And she sang a few songs in one of his parties. And he loved recording his guests. He was like a recording enthusiastic. Yeah. So he recorded her both in the party and then set up a session with her to record. But she never put out any albums or any music because she really got, every time she tried, she got a no thanks.
Yeah.
And after, I think in 2004 or 6, I'm not sure, Jean was a guest on David Garland's Spinning on Air.
Okay.
And brought one of her recordings. And that was basically the first time anyone has heard her music since she disappeared or since she stopped performing it. She sent a lot of recordings to her brother and his wife, kind of like a Song of the Month club. And he really tried to, give it out to people to listen to and to promote it, also in the hopes that she'll come back if she knows that, someone is listening to her music and enjoys her music. But only at that point in the Spinning on Air show, people got familiar with her, and later they contacted her brother and put up a record of all of those recordings she did in the 50s. But still not a lot of people are familiar with her story. She has a very small, fan club. But she's really such a unique person, and I think everybody should get a chance to listen to her and her story, because it really makes you feel like you're not alone. And
so for your project, you've been doing live shows, performing live. Is it going to be a recorded element to it?
I'm not sure yet. I need also to check as far as rights and everything, because her brother passed away, and she's probably not alive. If she is, she's like over 100 years old. She was born in 1923, like almost 100. So I need to check as far as licensing. But for now, I hope to get, I'm applying for some grant proposals because I want to incorporate live visuals in the show. But the show itself is first all of her music. How
many songs do you perform?
We're now doing 12, but we are going to add some more. She has a lot of recordings that weren't put out with the record. There's actually the record label that put out her record is called Squirrel Thing, is a part of one of her songs. And they have both her and Molly Drake albums that are both like very unfamiliar, sort of hidden figures, female composers that weren't recognized. But we have around 12 songs, and throughout the show, I'm telling her story. I'm reading journal entries found in her filing cabinet. I'm reading quotes from different places, from Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend, which also has a character who disappears. And at the end, I'm giving a small wish for both myself and the audience. But slowly, I'm just revealing her story and what happened to her, and I'm also reading the draft of her goodbye letter to her friends and family, which when I read for the first time, I just sobbed for an hour. Yeah.
Could you think about what pain she must have been in just to leave everything behind?
Yeah. I think she was in pain for years. And, you know, people, especially at that time, mental illness wasn't a thing. And it wasn't recognized as something that is, you know, not being crazy, etc. And, you know, her family and friends tried to help as much as they could, but also in kind of a cricket way. Like her mom, for example, was more upset about the fact that she wasn't married than the fact that she was depressed. And that's the thing. I think it's still, you know, even though the conversation is a lot more fluid right now about those things, whether it's her sexual orientation, whether it was, you know, being a woman, whether it was the fact she wasn't, you know, the most glorious, feminine, like, ladylike. I think still it's an issue, and still it's something that is not necessarily being perceived as okay, even nowadays. And I think it's really important because everybody is feeling that. Everyone. There's not a single person who doesn't feel that way in some aspect of his life or his or her life. So it's just something that I feel like people should not be afraid as much to be vulnerable. Because once I realized that being vulnerable is my strength and not something that is not okay, I feel a lot better, whether about myself or about, you know, just living and with other people. And I can communicate my emotions so much better from that.
And it makes you feel a little or feel better when you share that vulnerability.
It's really scary.
It is.
It's really scary.
But somebody will like, oh yeah, me too. I get that.
I think everybody does, you know. It's a part of the human experience, and the question is, where do we put our emphasis? Do we put it on judgment? Do we put it on competitiveness? Do we put it on, you know, earning money and being excellent? Or do we put it on, you know, having a glass of wine with friends and sharing, you know, things that are real?
That's what I did. Because I was at work and I had not said it before, and I was saying to someone, if I get depressed, I'll start like emotionally eating, right? So I'll eat like a sleeve of cookies, and a guy who was like, "Oh, me too." So we're like, and I'm like, "Oh, I would not have guessed," and he was like, "The same thing." But it's like it didn't feel like, oh, this horrible, shameful thing that
it shouldn't be shameful.
I would tell no one.
It's a part of life. It's a part of living, and it shouldn't feel shameful. And this whole thing, for me, speaking of cultural shocks, one of the, you know, most interesting things for me was this whole "Hi, how are you? Good, how are you?" scenario of like, you know, people asking me how I'm doing and keep on walking, like not even waiting for an answer. And this is like
really
today's hello, and they really don't care. And even if it's someone that I know pretty well or I'm already kind of friends with, but not very close, and he's asking me how I'm doing, and I'm saying how I'm actually doing, whether if it's great or terrible or in the middle or all of it together, they don't know how to react to it. Like, you know, if I say something along the lines of like, you know, it's been a really rough day, I'm really tired, but it's okay. He's like, oh.
Like, I didn't mean all that.
It's like, because they don't want to hear it. And I think that's shameful a lot more than feeling those kind of things, because we all do. It's like, if we keep on pretending, especially with today's, you know, social media and all of this thing of like trying to make people view you as what you want to be perceived as, this is not, that's not real. Like, speaking of fake news, this is also fake news. Like, just really be yourself. Yeah. Like, and in order for people to feel like they can, it's so important that we give the space for it. Mm-hmm. And, release the judgment, whether about ourselves or of other people.
Yeah. Because I can tell you, I've not posted a selfie of me in bed eating cookies.
Exactly.
I have not posted that picture yet.
Exactly. Not many people have.
No.
Yeah.
So where's the best place people can keep up with what you're doing online?
Yeah, so my website is under construction for now, but I have a Facebook page under Gaya Feldheim Schorr Music. Mm-hmm. And I have an Instagram. I also do part-time film photography. Okay. So I have an Instagram under Magic Film Girl, which my roommate decided is my brand name. Okay. Even though I feel a little awkward with it, I think it's a cool name. I'm very up for magic. I'm a pretty big nerd. And I post there about my shows. Okay. And I think generally online, I'm performing in very different groups and venues around Brooklyn and Manhattan mostly. I'm hoping to get this project going as far as it can go. So I hope in the next year to have as much shows as I can.
Well, the music I've heard from it sounds wonderful.
Thank you.
You have a great voice. And it's a great story and great hearing about you. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. And there you have it, my conversation with Gaya Feldheim Schorr. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, I will put links in the show notes so you can check out her music. I am online. Several places, talkmusictalk.com for more podcast information and to stream every single episode. You can also find me on social media at This Is Boice, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, those type of things. And I have some call to actions for you. If you enjoyed this episode with Gaya, please share it on social media or leave a 5-star rating and or review wherever you happen to be listening, especially on iTunes, because this helps to grow the TMT audience. Also, there is a TMT app. It is wherever you like to get your apps. It is free, or you can stream the podcast or subscribe to it on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Google Play. Just search for Talk Music Talk. You can also find the podcast on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/This Is Boice, starting with episode 100. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, and there will be a next time, this one's for you, Liz.